distinguished guests, colleagues, education collaborators, activists, good morning. I am truly, truly honored to have been invited to make this opening keynote address at the Yidan Prize 2024. Not least because I am so touched by Dr. Charles Yen Yidan's motivation to effect progressive change through education. I, too, am a passionate believer in the importance of education for social transformation and intergenerational change. A passion that was born out of my personal experience of growing up in a household in the Caribbean with parents for whom education was the be-all and end-all. And I usually tell this story, and I was telling it to Lucy Lake last night, that my father would purchase our textbooks at the start of the summer holiday so that we can get ahead of children for the next year. That was the level of commitment and passion in that household. And indeed, over the years, I have witnessed that intergenerational change in both my own family and in the countless families that I have met across the world. Like those of you in this room, I have seen how quality education empowers the individual, benefits households and communities, and breaks intergenerational cycles of poverty and deprivation. But perhaps the most powerful demonstration of that comes through investment in girls' education. And as Professor Lutz and indeed organizations like CAMFED have shown, the evidence is compelling. We know that, for example, a girl who stays in school is less likely to have, or more likely to have choices. She's more likely to earn more, to be more resilient to climate change, for example, and other pressures, to have smaller, healthier, and better educated families. She's also less likely to experience violence now and indeed in her future. But the truth is, too many education systems today are under stress, not delivering the expected outcomes for those girls and indeed for millions of children across the world. The resilience of learners, teachers, schools, and indeed wider education systems is being tested. What are those stresses? What are those factors affecting resilience? I tend to call them the 4 C's. The first of which is COVID, or indeed the long tail of COVID. Many children have simply not returned to school, or at best, attendance is patchy. Just last week in the UK's school inspectorate indicated an alarming level of children missing school and that attendance issues had deepened since the pandemic in the UK. The second C is climate. We know that climate change is already disrupting the education of about 40 million children a year, and that education is needed indeed to solve and to respond to the climate crisis. And then there's conflict. Conflict has stalled or even reversed progress in many places, with humanitarian needs at its highest level since 1945. And then there's conservatism. Women's and girls' rights, for example, are under attack. A strengthened anti-rights movement is undermining decades of hard-won progress. And this is occurring at all levels, at local levels, at the multilateral level, and indeed as well in the digital space. But perhaps one of the most egregious examples of that is what's happening today in Afghanistan. And in many contexts, these 4 C's of COVID, of conflict, climate, and conservatism are landing in a space where the education system is already struggling, for example, to keep pace with population growth, to pay teachers consistently and on time, and indeed to deploy them effectively. And we know that this polycrisis is coming together of these various crises, leads to school closures, to dropouts, and learning loss with far-reaching consequences for children largely poor and marginalized children. We know that learning is under threat and is deepening inequality. We risk losing entire generations of learners with disastrous consequences, lifelong implications for them, their communities, and their countries. But don't just take it from me. Just take a look at the data. Let's look at the information that's coming through to us. We know that halfway to the deadline to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, learning poverty has reached alarming levels. The 2022 State of Education report estimated that 70% of 10-year-olds are unable to understand a simple written text. This figure rises to 89% in sub-Saharan Africa, where only 1 in 10 children leave primary school able to read, compared to 9 in 10 in OECD countries. Every day, millions of children around the world are denied their basic rights to safety and learning. I think you'll agree with me that this is unacceptable. In this world of interrupted education, how do we revitalize and empower these individuals and systems? And indeed, if interrupted education is the new norm, how do we respond to the world as it is, rather than the world that we want it to be? How do we build the resilience of learners, educators, and indeed the wider systems to ensure lasting transformational change? The scale and the depth of the learning crisis means that we cannot act in isolation or wait for the solutions to appear. We need to act. We need to act now, but the question is, how? So today, I'll proffer a few suggestions. The first suggestion is that we must invest in safe, quality, equitable education, and we must start with the basics. Because we know that to unlock the promise and the full potential of quality education, we need to give all children the foundational skills they need to progress through their lives. Done well, foundational skills create the conditions for students to be resilient. It lays the foundation to enable them to gain the higher order skills, those digital skills, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, and communication skills, also vital and essential to thrive in this century. We know that what happens in early childhood is crucial to securing that foundational learning, particularly for vulnerable and marginalized children. These formative years see the brain undergo rapid growth, making it a sensitive period for learning. Adequate levels of nutrition and healthcare are essential from birth to support this process alongside a safe and nurturing environment. Indeed, the transformative impact of investing early, we know, goes well beyond education. It can help to bring about the social transformation that we are all so passionate about. As the UK's gender envoy, I believe that a crucial component of social transformation and resilience building is gender equality. By instilling inclusive foundational values early on, we can break the cycle of inequality and shape future generations that view gender equality as a cornerstone of a just and progressive society. For we can only build a more resilient, a fairer, a safer, wealthier, and greener world where everyone benefits and no one is left behind if we put women and girls at the heart of all of our efforts. Indeed, quality education is a critical tool for dismantling the attitudes and behaviors rooted in gender inequality that perpetuate violence, both against children and gender-based violence more broadly. It holds the potential to create a generation of all genders that firstly rejects violence as a means of asserting power or control, and secondly centers equitable values. And the benefits of investing early for children extends to women's economic empowerment as well. More accessible, quality early years provision can only be a good thing. It enables women to work and contribute to their household's income, building their own economic resilience, and indeed that of their wider communities. But it's good news as well. I've been a bit doom-laden so far. The good news is that today, more than ever, we have a better sense, we have a clearer sense of what works to transform education systems into fountains of resilience. We know what works to deliver foundational learning, thereby improving children's learning outcomes and contributing to wider social transformation. And this includes, for example, informing parents and communities of the benefits of education, teaching children according to their level and not according to their age, providing teachers with well-structured educational materials, supporting innovative early years programs. And indeed, last night we saw examples of that. And one of the prize winners of this year on Cannot Wait to Learn is an excellent example of that. A learning program that also incorporates social and emotional learning and being delivered in some of the most challenging contexts across the world. My second suggestion is around more and better education investments. While there's an uplift in high-quality research and evidence on what works to improve student learning outcomes in low-income countries, the priority now is to ensure that these interventions are embedded in government systems and that they are sustainable at scale. This is within a context of tightening fiscal space in many donor countries and partner countries as well, combined with the existing funding gap that we have in the education sector. Today, the quality of education spend is perhaps more important than ever. But of course, more effective investment is crucial, we know that. But money is not enough. And as Dr. Chen said just earlier on, we need to partner and to collaborate with other countries and organizations. As ever, cooperation is key to responding to the crisis in resilience. And that's why, for example, the UK became a founding member of the Global Coalition for Foundational Learning, alongside partners like UNICEF, UNESCO, USAID, the World Bank, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Global Partnership for Education. Recognizing the scale of the crisis, our 7 global organizations are working closely together to support national policymakers dedicated to transforming learning in schools across the globe. Our increased global focus on foundational learning is an important shift and provides the opportunity to ensure that all children, including marginalized girls, children living with disabilities, children caught up in conflict and crisis, that they achieve what they deserve in the education system. The coalition, and more importantly, the joint partnership with so many governments around the world, is empowering. And it's extremely exciting to see that the priority that's been given by many partner countries to foundational learning through the Global Partnership for Education, or indeed through other operations. But real progress is reliant on these leaders translating this positive energy and commitments into tangible progress on the ground, securing and sustaining the political will that is needed to address the challenge of getting more children learning, both quickly and at scale. So those are 2 suggestions that I have made. But the question I think that still remains is it enough? Still, as I said, millions of children are entering school late and with limited school readiness. In many countries, children formally start at the age of 7, but many times later, and arrive at school without those socio-emotional skills, the motor skills, or the general knowledge needed to start learning. This is unsurprising, given the levels of poverty and marginalization in many parts of the world. And unfortunately, the children who need the support most don't tend to get it. They live in households or in communities where they're exposed to violence, with parents overstretched and overstressed from dealing with economic, health, or climate-related interruptions. And those are the children who are probably least likely to get the support that they need. And indeed, despite the strong evidence that early childhood development has high potential for impact and resilience building, it is often underfunded. Only 19% of children in low-income countries, for example, have access to pre-primary education. And in many instances, it's provided outside of the formal system, outside of the state system, and not properly regulated. And we know that the seeds of inequality, once they are sown, that they actually increase as children move up the education system. But look, I've stood here for the last 15 minutes or so, sounding the alarm on the polycrisis, sounding the alarm on the resilience of learners, educators, and the wider education system, sounding an alarm on foundational learning. But quite frankly, others have done so before me, and others will do so after me. And while we have made progress globally, I think that we need far more political traction. I'm not convinced that as a global community, we have woken up yet to the full impact of the crisis in foundational learning and the need for urgent action. So how can we do that? How can we get some of that political traction? How we can probably move some of this forward? How do we support governments to embed those results and outcomes orientation into education systems, making it part of the DNA? How do we build internal accountability systems? And given the power of foundational learning to transform societal norms and progress, for example, on issues like gender equality, should we not be joining forces with women's rights movements, women's rights organizations, social movements, social organizations? Indeed, to future-proof our education systems, we must also build the resilience of our educators. Have we harvested and distilled the lessons from the pandemic, when educators developed innovative and collaborative approaches, not only to build their own resilience, but those of their students and indeed of their schools and the wider system? Have we harvested those? Have we distilled those? Are we equipping them, the educators, adequately with the necessary training tools and approaches, both psychological as well as digital, to buffer the interruptions in education? Are communication channels between educators and their employers sufficiently open? And what are the role of education unions, for example, like Education International? How do we plan, and even if we plan, how do we finance and respond to this interrupted education? How do we respond to the polycrisis? How do we finance that? How do we get the humanitarian system to better integrate or to better include education support in its response? Should we not be building greater flex into our development financing as well, so that when a crisis hits, we can pivot more easily? Shouldn't we also be thinking about contingency funding that's prearranged, built-in pauses, for example, for when crisis hits? Should we be providing guarantees so that national governments can increase their headroom? The use of insurance, have we thought innovatively enough about that? And while we look to develop new instruments, maybe we should also be thinking creatively about how we incorporate risk into the current and existing funds, like the International Financing Facility for Education, like the Education Cannot Wait, like the Global Partnership for Education. And we need to go beyond state provision and to need to look at the whole system, provision in the non-state sector as well, which is so hugely important in so many parts of the world. And so we'll need to think about early childhood development groups, women's groups, carer networks, for example, if in fact we are to embrace the entire education system. And we know that poverty and financial stress are the heart of dropout and poor attendance, many times exacerbated at a time of crisis. And so interventions outside of the education system are also crucial. Social protection measures, cash transfers to households, for example, at times of crisis helps to keep kids in school, giving households agency to make those choices. And then who do we talk to? We tend to focus our attention on ministers of education and their senior officials. Hugely important. But is that enough? Are we getting through to heads of state and to other ministries such as finance? Do we pay adequate attention to parliamentarians, to parents, and to the wider public? Each so important in demanding a better education for our children and indeed holding government to account. And if we are to continue to move in the direction of innovative financing, should we not be reaching out more systematically to finance experts? Indeed, our collective pursuit to end learning poverty, building resilience of learners, educators, and the wider education system, we all know it is not just an investment in education. It's an investment in the very fabric of our societies. Many years ago, we as a global community promised to leave no one behind. We should not. We must not. And I believe that together we will not. Thank you very much.